It's always a pleasure for me to have a conversation with Rhythm Desai, and what a day to have a conversation with him. On the Indian stock markets continue to rally, touching new records practically every day. The Prime Minister is meeting the big bull, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. Those pictures are the talk of the town. It's the trending story. And while the Indian economy seems to be on the mend, there is cautious optimism with respect to the economy. The Indian stock markets are in a different trajectory altogether. If you take a look at what the data is telling us, the outperformance is very visible. The Nifty is up 28% year to date, much better than its peers and much better than the developed markets like the US and the UK as well. If you take a look at the data in terms of inflows, a record 67,000 odd crore rupees have come in already in this year from foreign institutional investors, almost 29,000 crores coming in from domestic institutional investors. The IPO market continues to buzz as well. We've got about 64,000 crore rupees raised in the IPO market as on the 30th of September of 2021. There are, of course, some concerns on the horizon with respect to inflation, the rise in prices and so on and so forth. But all of that is being shrugged off by the markets today. So Rhythm, my very first question to you, that famous, this is the mother of all bull runs, the statement that we've also gotten used to over the last few years. How would you describe what we're seeing today?
Yeah, maybe we can call it the grandmother of all bull runs. But, Shireen, you stated some really interesting stats. And I think the story actually goes back to 2007. At that time, corporate profits were booming. They had hit 7% of GDP, up from around 2% 5 years prior to that. They were benefiting from the tailwind of the reforms that had happened, the market-oriented reforms that had happened between 1999 and 2004, and of course, very strong global GDP growth. And at that time, policymakers decided to make a shift. They decided that we need to take some of these profits and transfer it to the labor class. And that was when Manrega got enacted. Now, what happened was that, India has a very large and probably you can arguably say excess labor. And when you peg wages artificially higher than the market clearing price, you basically get inflation. So when the dust settled on the GFC, we got inflation, CPI became double digit, and soon we were in stagflation. The incoming government sought to fix the inflation problem using the RBI, and the RBI recommended that real rate should be in positive territory. And I dare say we may have actually run a little too high in terms of real rates, and growth was very depressed. We lost almost 13 years in the bargain, and growth remained below potential for almost a decade. Come 2019, when that GDP growth print of June came, I think the government decided it was time to move policy back in favor of entrepreneurs, in favor of risk takers. And we got this massive cut in corporate taxes, which was completely unexpected. That's September 19. Unfortunately, COVID came in the way, but that's not stopped the government from undertaking policies which are targeted specifically to boost the share of profits in GDP. Mind you, the profit share in GDP is back to 2%. And I think we may be in an upcycle which may take it back to 7%. So there's a lot of profit growth coming in the next 4 or 5 years. There's a tailwind of global macro, which is in our favor. So that's, explaining why there's so much of enthusiasm in the stock markets.
Well, clearly, those are important factors that you touch upon, and you talk about this new profit cycle as well. But, Rhythm, you mentioned some of the changes that have happened specifically in 2019 that have led to the kind of growth that we are seeing in the markets today, as well as the recovery that we are starting to now see in the economy, of course, COVID notwithstanding. But you talked about the period between 2003 and 2007, which was, again, one of the bull runs that we've seen, 6 in all that we've seen in the Indian stock markets. And many are suggesting that the current bull run seems to mirror what we saw in the 2003-2007 period. What are the similarities? And more importantly, what are the differences? Do you believe that this market, given what you just told us in terms of the profit cycle, will have significantly stronger legs as we move forward?
Yeah, Shireen, actually, I have been also one of those people who have made this comparison. And of all the bull markets that I have tracked and witnessed, the closest that we come to is this 03-07 period. But that's where the comparison ends, because bull markets are never actually similar. They're very different from each other, and the factors are different. The economy in India is actually a whole lot larger. We were only $300 billion in GDP way back in '03. We're no longer that small. We're 10 times bigger now. We are a much bigger stock market as well. We're amongst the top 7, 8 stock markets in the world. So this is a different size of the economy. It takes a lot more to move this. Yes, the similarities are that corporate profits are depressed. The similarities are there is some global tailwind. But then global GDP growth averaged 5%. I don't think we're going to get that type of average for the next 4 or 5 years on global GDP growth. And therefore, India is going to be far more idiosyncratic, far more dependent on domestic policies, and will have to rely a lot less than what happens globally. And then I think global politics has changed. We're moving away from that from the bipolar world, which was China, US centric, to a multipolar world. And India is sitting right in the thick of these things to benefit. And the government has pursued policies like production-linked incentive schemes, like new labor laws, and even the repealing of the retro tax with an idea to attract FDI. So I think one of the big differences will be in terms of how much FDI we'll be able to attract, which includes venture capital, which includes PE, and which also includes direct investing in new manufacturing facilities. The other difference, I think, is in sector leadership. I don't think it's going to be led by energy and materials like it was in that period, and not even financials. I think it will be led, and it's very obvious now, it's going to be led by technology. So this is a very different, sector leadership. I think the other sector that may, lead the charge is consumers. And I think industrials will also do well because we may be actually looking at a major capex cycle. In fact, people underestimate the amount of capital investments that can take place. We have an energy transition, we have climate change, we have FDI, we have PLI, we have scope things in our favor to support a big capex cycle. So, some similarities, but lots of differences.
Lots of differences indeed. And yes, that private capex cycle, we've been waiting for that to turn, and it has been elusive, but the expectation is that we're on the cusp of seeing that revival. But Rhythm, talking about differences, and I want to understand from you what you make of this difference that is being spoken about, or at least it's getting a lot of mind share and mind space at this point in time. The NSE seeing 50 lakh new investor registrations in this financial year since the start of April of 2021. There is a lot of talk about the participation of millennials in the market and whether this is going to emerge as the new, retail investor. How do you read what we are seeing in terms of the further democratization of the retail participation?
Yeah, Shireen, we've been writing about this for 4 or 5 years, the coming boom in household investing in equity. And the seeds were actually sown a decade earlier. The regulator has spent a lot of time and energy along with industry participants to educate people on the merits of systematic investing. And, that has borne fruit. Systematic investing is now getting more and more popular. More people are joining this. And it's very simple. The Nifty or the Sensex has compounded double digit over the last 25, 30 years, in fact, close to 15%. Even if that is 12 or 13% going into the next 20 years, wealth creation only takes place through equities, not through investing in fixed income and bonds. India's population is young, should be not so averse to taking a bit of risk, has learned that systematic investing works, and therefore I think this may continue for quite a while. Remember, only 5% of household balance sheets, in fact, less than 5% is in equities, 10% is in gold, 50% is in property. That number goes from 5 to 10. We're talking about multiple billions of dollars over, the next few years coming from retail into Indian stocks.
Right. I want to pick up on a couple of the issues that you spoke of there and understand from you what the impact could be possibly as far as the markets are concerned. Let's talk about one of the big differences, and that is just the strength of corporate balance sheets. We have gone through a process of corporates repairing their balance sheets, deleveraging significantly. And in light of the fact that you believe we're on the cusp of seeing a big capex revival, do you really see the appetite, the animal instincts this time around being unleashed on the back of healthier balance sheets?
Absolutely. Balance sheets in India were in recession for almost a decade. We're coming out of that recession. Interest rates are low. Growth is perking up. It's an ideal environment. And of course, there's equity investing. I mean, Shireen, just think about it. The government the government of India is backstopping the telecom sector with equity. When did that happen in India? So I think equity investing is there. So there's a lot of capital waiting to pour into India. I don't see why there won't be risk appetite for corporates to actually put money back to work into the economy.
What about the new age companies? You talked about technology and how that will be one of the big bets to watch out for, Rhythm. But, the Zomatos, the Oyos of the world, and one can argue about the sustainability of their business models, but the kind of reception that they are getting from the stock market, what do you make of that story and the implications that it has?
So, Shireen, see, I'll make two generic points. The first is that it's a source of growth. The trailing 12 months, which was a period when we had two COVID waves, has seen $30 billion come into as equity capital into startups. That's 1% of GDP. It's a staggering number. Now, we know tech companies don't conserve. They don't save this capital. They actually spend it. So this will go right back into the economy with a much higher multiplier effect. I would estimate that this capital that has come into tech companies or the startups in itself will generate 35, 50, 70 basis points of GDP growth. Okay, so that's one. The second is the more generic point about technology and how these companies grow. These are very scalable models. The difference between the tech world and the physical world is that it takes 25 years to build a bank in the physical world because you have to go corner after corner, street after street, city after city, building brick and mortar. Brick and mortar doesn't come by the snap of the fingers. In the tech world, because things are virtual, scalability is not an issue. You can scale from 0 to 100 very quickly. So that's what goes in favor of these companies. But of course, when you are scalable, you can also be prone to very quick failure. It takes a long time for a brick and mortar company to fail. In fact, it's a pretty slow death. And you have a lot of time to exit. Tech companies will fail much more quickly. So it's a risky world. You get, it works both ways. But the stock market enthusiasm right now is likely justified because what we are getting in the first round is really the best of the class. And these are businesses that have already proven scalability, have already delivered, GMV. They've already delivered. Some of them are actually even profitable. Later on, as the bull market matures, the quality of the issuances will suffer. More risky stuff will come on the table. And then I think investors need to be a bit more careful.
Yeah, you're right about that. But, Rhythm, I also want to touch upon what we're seeing happen as far as the government's disinvestment program is concerned. And for years now, there's been a disinvestment target. And for years, we've missed that disinvestment target. This time around, there is a policy, a very clear policy as far as strategic disinvestment is concerned. Air India is probably going to be given to the Tatas in the next few days. We're given to understand that decision is basically now a formality which will be announced shortly. What do you make of the strategic disinvestment pipeline, the monetization pipeline, and the implications it has not just for the economy, but also for the markets?
So again, two things here, Shireen. I think the earlier policy of selling piecemeal stuff, and that was what we've been pursuing since 2004, really has been destructive in terms of value for the assets of this country. Because when you're selling little by little, you're literally bleeding the value. So thankfully, we moved away from that, and now we're doing more strategic stuff. Unfortunately, some of the government assets, particularly which are in ESG negative sectors, will be very hard to sell. But then there are other things that I think are going to get lapped up very easily. Stuff that is in the infrastructure sector and some other sectors which are not unfavorable on the ESG account. So I think there will be some which will be hard to do, but there are others that will be easy to do. Obviously, capital gets raised and the government is committed to put that back into the economy and that lifts the growth rate. So it creates a virtuous cycle. So I think it's very good news. We have moved away from piecemeal divestments to more strategic unlocking. And I think this will be far more successful than what we have achieved over the last, say, 15 to 17 years.
Well, that certainly is the hope. But, you talked about ESG, and that is one of the big themes playing out at this point in time. CEOs looking at it, funds looking at it, investors looking at it. What is it going to mean for India in the next 3 to 5 years as a theme, Rhythm?
So see, Shireen, in the Western Hemisphere, ESG is a bottom-up thing. Consumers are making conscious choices, and therefore corporates have to make themselves ESG friendly. They don't have a choice because that's where the demand is. In India, it is mostly top-down. Our consumer awareness has not reached that stage. We're obviously not as rich to afford, ESG friendly products. So this is going to be more top down. It relates to our commitment to the Paris Accord. It relates to our overall desire to make the environment less polluted. It's the regulatory changes that are happening in governance. So it will be driven from the top. So it's slightly different from the Western Hemisphere. But make no mistake, this is going to be a very, very big theme. Companies that refuse to listen to what the market is saying will see their valuations suffer, whether they agree or not agree. The fact is that the market, and it's just not specific ESG funds, but the entire investing universe is going to be very focused on ESG. So this is not going away for the next 10, 12, 15 years.
It's not going away for the next 10 to 15 years. But one of the other themes that we're now starting to see much more of is the rise of the activist shareholder in India. We've seen this play out globally. It's starting to get some legs in here in India, Rhythm. How are you reading this development and what it means?
Shireen, I can only see this as positive for minority shareholders. In several instances, we've had minority shareholders getting shafted. The fact that there is greater activism should benefit minority shareholders. In some cases, there will always be some delay in decisions and some frustration that may happen. But in large number of cases, I think minority shareholders will walk away with greater returns. And when that is happening, it's good for the stock market. It's not a bad thing. So I welcome this. Yeah.
Not a bad thing at all. But Rhythm, you were talking about FDI. We've seen record FDI flows into the country. Private equity has been a big participant in the growth story and, of course, been playing consolidator as well in the last several big deals that have taken place. What's the outlook like as far as M&A is concerned, and what could that mean potentially? This theme of conglomerates picking up startups now picking up listed entities. What are you reading in terms of triggers as far as the M&A cycle is concerned?
See, I think it will follow suit like it did in 03-07 when you were very busy covering M&A. I remember that. And I think you're going to get very busy doing M&A. That's going to come more and more. It's very obvious. Businesses looking to invest. One easy way to kickstart your growth cycle is to buy another business. It takes a long time to put money on the ground and build capacity from scratch. So that consolidation, I think, is a given.
Yeah, we've talked about the bull case, Rhythm, but there are some red flags. Whether we choose to acknowledge them or the market chooses to acknowledge them or not is a different matter altogether. But what would you be watching out for as possible irritants, as possible risks? Whether the Fed acts in November, I think it's now fairly clear that it's not going to be a situation where we are likely to see a tantrum along with the taper. But what else would you see as potential risks?
In fact, Shireen, I'm worried less about the Fed because, this is reminiscent again about, this is one of the similarities with 03-07. The Fed was unwinding all the time. It had multiple rate hikes, didn't have actually any impact because when the Fed is tapering in a strong growth environment, it's actually bullish for risk assets, it's not bearish. But I do worry about the energy complex. Energy prices should not be taken lightly. There's no new capacity coming up, and India is still dependent on imported energy, and it will take some time for us to reduce that dependence. So, we import over 1 billion barrels of oil. So keep a watch on that. That's not looking very good for us. I do worry about, any sudden shift in policy away from boosting share of profits in GDP. That sometimes gets linked to election cycles, and there are lots of elections coming up next year. So we need to keep a watch on that. I think we have to keep an eye on market valuations. In some places, they are going out of control. And when that happens, you get a very sharp correction. So, that should not be wished away either. I think that's something to keep an eye on. The RBI will exit at some point in time. We'll hope that it's a smooth exit, but there could be volatility around that. So keep an eye on that. Quite a few things to monitor. It's not like it's going to be a smooth ride. I would actually expect more volatility in the ensuing 12 months than the kind of straight line increase in the market values that we've seen in the last 12 months.
Yeah, you preempted my question, Rhythm, and that's exactly what I was going to ask you. I mean, are you comfortable with valuations? Which are the sectors that you're not comfortable with where valuations are today? You said that in some pockets, in some zones, it is starting to look frothy and uncomfortable.
So see, Shireen, valuations is a function of time frame. So if you're in this for 5 years, then I think we'll be okay because in to some extent the market is anticipating this multi-year growth cycle and therefore is trying to price it in. It can never perfectly price that in. In some cases, it gets a little bit overdone. So if I break the market into two cohorts, which is large cap and small caps, I think small caps look a little bit more frothy than large caps. So again, that's one thing. Then if you break this down by sectors, I think there is some frothiness in certain consumer stocks, some frothiness in technology, less so in industrials, less so in, say, consumer discretionary. So, it's like there. And this is really more relevant for people who are making 1 year calls or 6 month calls because there will be some rotation in the market. Some of it may not be so smooth and may cause markets to react violently. Some of it may be smoother and may escape our attention on a day-to-day basis.
You talked about the fact that it's unlikely that we're going to continue to see this sort of smooth one-way ride up, which is what we've seen over the last 300 plus odd days. There's been no significant correction in the market. As and when we do see one or the kind of volatility that you anticipate, what's the kind of correction that you expect we should factor in or be prepared for?
Shireen, how I wish I knew the answer. But I think anywhere between 5 to 20% is par for the course. Again, just going back to the 03-07 cycle, we had two very big corrections then, and both of them were, I think, around 30%. So I'm not calling that type of a correction right now. I really don't know, but anything between 5 and 20% will be par for the course. I do think the trigger will come from outside India. It's encouraging to see that India has actually been able to withstand the S&P correction that we've seen over the past few days because the S&P has corrected, tech stocks in the US have corrected. We've remained more or less, immune to that, reflecting the idiosyncrasies in the Indian market, which are driving our stocks hard. But I think, mostly the correction will be sourced from abroad rather than locally.
But what could it be? I mean, you talked about the fact that the Fed is unlikely to cause any meaningful disruption. So is it largely to do with commodity prices, energy prices? I mean, what could cause the imbalance?
No, for now, actually, Shireen, I'll keep a watch on China. There are lots of things happening there. They are suffering power outages. There are some shortages there. Production is getting affected. They have a zero COVID policy, which is, I think, hurting output there. They have a bit of crisis in their financials or debt markets, and one loan repayment has been missed. So keep an eye on that. China is not small. China is we all know that, right? China is the second largest economy in the world. It could be the source of risk for global equities.
It could be the source of global risk. We've seen, Evergrande and so on and so forth capture a lot of the headlines, but haven't really seen any meaningful impact on global markets so far on account of that. But you're saying that should be a risk factor to watch out for. Are you getting a little nervous, Ridham? And how many calls are you getting in a day from people asking you, "Kitna aur chadega bazaar?"
See, Shireen, there is unprecedented interest. There is unprecedented interest in India. The calls that I do usually, with foreign investors start like, I've not been paying attention to this. This has gone away from me. What do I do now? Okay, so, it doesn't look like...
Is the FOMO theme a large theme that's playing out at this point in time?
It is. I think a lot of people have missed India. The people who have participated from abroad are usually the guys who have been around for a while. New money has not really come in. I do see some new money coming in. So, that I think is something we need to watch out for. But, frankly, I remain nervous, and that's a good thing. As we were discussing backstage, being nervous is a good thing in the markets. It's when people cease to be nervous, when people start saying, sell your house and buy stocks, that's the time when you have to get really worried. I don't think people are still saying that. People are being very careful about the way they're putting money to work. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing. When you have pictures of the Prime Minister meeting the big bull, what message does that send out, Ridham?
See, I tell you, Shireen, this is the way I read it. Okay, in the history of this country, no Prime Minister has met anyone who makes his living out of investing or trading stocks. Okay, it's been a no-go area for politicians in this country. It's something that they do not want to really get into, right? The fact that the Prime Minister is doing that is a big message out there for risk takers. It's your time. And I think that's where it's a message we've never got from the political class in this country. So I think it's a huge, I mean, it's just a photograph on social media, but to me, actually, it's a big signal.
It's a big signal, a big statement. So, given the fact that you believe that this could now be the grandmother of the bull run, Ridham, what are we talking about in terms of where we could be over the next 5 years?
I mean, I really don't know, Shireen. If earnings compound at about, say, 20 to 25%, as I think they will, and even if stocks don't compound that much, and this compounds, say, 15% to adjust for the starting point of valuations, I think you still go a long, long way. You probably more than double in 5 years, right?
That certainly is the hope at this point in time. Ridham Desai, it's always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here on this very interesting conversation, and we look forward to hearing more from you. And of course, we look forward to continue to track the markets. But thanks very much, as always, for your time. Well, that's the big message there from Ridham Desai on where the India story is headed, and more importantly, where the Indian equity story is headed, a story that has captured the imagination not just of the nation, but of global investors as well. For now, I hand it back to you.